Welcome again to the parenting series, Coping Parents and Cooperative Kids. I'm Alex Mabe. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor here in the Department of Psychiatry and Health Behavior at the Georgia Health Sciences University. We've been talking about how to help you as parents to deal with various problems your children might be having, whether it's mood problems or behavioral problems or others. And today we're going to work on contracting. Contracting is a very important skill because it helps you as the parent to use your contingency management, your consequences, to teach children very important lessons in life. We can teach children a lot of different ways, through instruction, of course, through modeling, but one of the very effective tools is to use consequences to teach children the right ways or the wrong ways to deal with various problems. So I'm going to walk through how to develop a behavioral contract to help you work with your child on whatever problem they might be having. And I'll go through some examples to give you some ideas of how to kind of do this in a nuts and bolts way. Let me remind you, though, of the basic understanding of why we want to do contingency management and the way that we want to do contingency management. We know that a lot of times parents spend nagging, scolding, and threatening and punishing their kids. And we know that if we do that too much, that it will eventually stop working. So it works at first, but then gradually stops working. And we've talked in a previous discussion about this, that as time goes on, this approach to consequences, so to speak, it just increases the negative relationship between the parent and the child, and really does not ultimately work if you overdo that approach. Instead, we have to bring in a balanced way, positive attention, praise, attention, and even reward. And when we do that, although it works very slowly, it begins to gradually improve the overall quality of the child's behavior, and of course that has many other positive benefits for the relationship and the mood, etc. So the point I want to make here is that as we look at contracting and teaching children through consequences, we want to balance between kind of the positive, praise, encouragement, and reward, and negative consequences, which might be criticism or punishments, and we'll talk about how to do that in an effective way. So let's go through the first part of contracting, which is deciding what problems we're going to work on in the first place. Now, I believe that half of the problem in getting children to improve, or teenagers to improve in their behavior, is that we're not clear in the first place as to how we want them to actually change. So for example, if you tell the child that you need to go clean your room, well, they may or may not do that depending on whether or not they understand what you mean by cleaning the room. And young children are especially prone to not making progress. Why? Because they don't really know what you're asking them to do. You say, go and play nicely with your brother. What does that mean? Go clean your room. Work hard in school. Those are all things that have a certain degree of vagueness about them to make it hard for children to understand what you're asking them. For older children and teenagers, if we're vague, they will take advantage of that. They will then begin to move around our expectations or rules for them. So for example, let's just say that you set the rule that says on Friday nights, you must be home at 11 o'clock. Well, that sounds pretty simple, but actually it's filled with loopholes. Two big ones might be, one, when you say be home, what do you mean by home? Do you mean the neighborhood? Do you mean the driveway? Do you mean on the front porch with my friends? Do you mean inside the house with my friends? You mean inside the house by 11 o'clock by myself? Is that what you mean? Now, if you're not clear on the first end of that conversation, then you're going to have a fight on your hands because they're going to maneuver around that lack of clarity. Must be home by 11 o'clock. According to whose watch? Their watch, your watch? You may end up getting some conflict with your child because you weren't clear what you meant by 11 o'clock. Now, I know this sounds almost silly to think, well, the child didn't understand that, but I promise you that if you're not clear on these issues, you will end up with a lot more conflicts and a lot of frustration in helping your child to follow the rules and obey what you're asking them to do. So it's very important for us to be clear what we're asking them to do. So let's now begin the basic components of contracting. Let's work through each component so that when you finish today, I hope that you will have a pretty good understanding of how to devise a contract and how to make sure it works. Okay, so let's start with the first section. So first of all, how do you want them to change? Now in this category, I call it the child or the teenager is expected to. And then you list no more than 2 to 3 things that you want them to significantly improve on. Now, why just 2 or 3 things? Or you may only have one, by the way, if it's only one issue that you're really concerned about. Well, if you try to work on too many things at once, you're going to overload the child. You're going to weaken the overall benefit of the rewards and punishments that you're going to set up. It's kind of like being an air traffic controller and you're trying to land 12 planes at the same time. That's a recipe for disaster. No, we need to just pick out 1 or 2, maybe 3 at the most, key behaviors, key issues that you want them to improve on, and work just on those with this contract. So what are some examples? So you might have a child who has mood problems, who has big temper tantrums, and you want to help them to reduce that and learn how to manage their anger in a better way. You might have a child who's not very cooperative, who tends to not comply when you ask them to do things, or is not really responsible for keeping up with homework or chores or other kinds of duties or responsibilities. They may not be getting along very well with their siblings. They may be in constant battles with them. They may have trouble with depression. They may be sitting around in kind of blah and bad moods and irritable and not really doing much of anything. And the list goes on and on. So just kind of think, what is it you want your child to do? What is it that you want to see improvement in? And then I want you to think of what is called the positive opposite. The positive opposite. So if your child has a problem behavior like not doing their homework, then the positive opposite of that, quite obviously, is to do your homework and to turn it in to the teacher the next day. If they're having a problem with their mood, where they're depressed and not doing anything, then what's the positive opposite of that? Well, behaving in a pleasant mood, engaging in positive activities. And so we want to kind of think of whatever it is, not just something them to stop doing, to no longer do, but to think of what is the positive opposite of that. What's the good thing they could be doing that would take the place of this negative behavior. So let's just say, as an example in this contract, the child is having trouble with their school performance. They're not behaving well in school. And so one of the things I might put on here is the child is expected to pay attention to the teacher. And we could certainly define even further what we mean by pay attention. Often that might mean something like when the teacher is talking, that you listen and you look at her, that you're able to repeat back instructions that are given to you, and most importantly, of course, is that you actually follow the directions the teacher's given. So that'd be an example of paying attention. Play or work nicely. With the other students. Might be a second goal that you'd work on with this child. And the third would be complete and turn in all assignments. And you might want to add to that with passing grades. And so in this particular child, we have 3 goals, 3 things that we want them to work out. We've spelled it out in a positive way, the positive opposite, and we have 3 things that are meaningful. And so we could, think about a lot of different ways we could approach various child problems. But let me go over some common ones that kind of stump parents as to how to put this in a contract form. So one of the questions often get asked is, what about lying? What about lying? Well, of course, the positive opposite of lying is telling the truth. The problem with telling truth is that you think about, when is it the children often lie? Well, they usually are lying when they're in trouble, when they're trying to avoid consequences, when they haven't done something they're supposed to do, or they did something they weren't supposed to do. And so children usually lie, not as just to make up stories, but in order to avoid responsibility or consequences. So when I have a child who has that problem and the parent's concerned about truth-telling, I usually encourage the parent to be less focused on truth-telling and more focused on what are the good behaviors that you want your child to work on, because that really is where the action is. So I'd be more pushing you in the direction of, well, let's improve their behavior and then we'll work on truth-telling. At the same time, I realize that for some parents, truth-telling is very important and you might want to include that on the contract. Well, I mentioned earlier, what about anger problems? Child who's blowing up and having big fits. What's the positive opposite of that? Well, one is you can't tell a child not to be angry. That's not reasonable. We all have trouble at times with our frustrations, anger. And so what you might use as a goal for that child would be something like, when you get angry, I want you to use exit and wait. So when mom and dad tells you to go exit and wait, I want you to go to your room and cool off, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So you might just kind of think about, instead of having a big fit and being disrespectful, what are some things that would be more appropriate to do when you're angry? Well, what about depression? What if a child is depressed, and that really is the major concern? What would be appropriate goals for the child in the contract? Well, it might be something like, I want you to talk and act in a pleasant way, in a pleasant manner. So that's impossible. You can't make yourself not be depressed, and that, of course, is totally true. But you can fake it for a while, and you can make yourself kind of behave in a more pleasant, you can talk in a more pleasant way. And the interesting thing about that is the more that we do that, the more our mood improves. I use the example of when a family is like getting ready for church in the morning and you're fussing and complaining and you can't get your act together and you're in the car and you're fussing the whole way and you're all in a grumpy mood, and then you get to church and then you smile and you act real sweet for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And what's interesting about that is then your mood actually starts changing. So getting a child to actually act in a more pleasant way is a very reasonable thing to do. A second goal that you might have for a child who is depressed is physical activity. We know that children who engage in regular physical activity do better. They tend to be in a more pleasant mood. So getting them to agree to regular, vigorous activity, 45 minutes or so a day for at least 5 days out of the week, might be one of the goals you'd have for a depressed child. And then last but not least, for a depressed child might be a goal such as, I want you to engage at least one activity that brings you enjoyment or meaningful activity, accomplishment, so to speak, at least one activity a week. And that might be something like join a club, get involved in some kind of project where they're really being active and engaged in a positive way. And what we know is that if you can get an activated child to engage in positive activities, if you can get them to exercise regularly, and if you can get them to act in a more pleasant way, their mood can actually improve. Now, I don't claim that that will fix all of a child's depression. It can be way more complicated than that. But you can see how a contract might help them to improve their effort. Okay, so we have the first section, which is the child is expected to section. So and we want to spell that out as carefully as we can. Let's go to the next section now, which is what the parents are expected to do. Now, the reason this section is there is because often in contracts, whenever a parent is very clear what you're asking them to do is going to have consequences for their efforts, that often the child feels like this contract business is all about you bossing them around, and they don't like that. And so this section, the parents expected to section, is really a symbolic way, so to speak, to say this basic message to the child. I am not trying to boss you around. I'm not trying to run your life for you. I am trying to help you to be successful, and I want you to succeed, so much so that I'm willing to do my part to help you. And so in the parents are expected to, you want to list out one or two or 3, depending on how many goals you have for the child. But for each goal that you have for your child, you'd like to come up with at least one thing that you as a parent can do to contribute. Now keep in mind, this section is really for your child's ears. This is something they will be pleased about when they read it and go, oh, you're willing to help me in this way. So let's go back to the school contract. So you might have something like, the parent is expected to set up a daily good news report system from school. So what that's about basically is that you are going to get a daily report from the teacher. Yes or no, has the child met the goals that you've established? You will have to make the effort to do that. You're willing to do that. You're willing to contribute to the contract in that way. Another thing might be that you will give reminders in the morning, but not nag. Kids hate nagging. And so we might want to put in there that I will do my best not to nag you. Well, let's say your child is working on anger problems. What would be a parent expected to goal there? Well, you might say something like, I'm willing to help you by watching my own anger and making sure that I use eggs and weight for myself as well. And that I will talk to you in a calm way once we've calmed down and try to resolve the problem, whatever it might be. So some specific way that you're going to contribute to their efforts. Again, you don't have to be comprehensive. You don't have to spell out everything you're going to do. At least one thing that just kind of reassures the child that you're there to help them. You're to help them to be successful. All right, so the first part of the contract is simply just spelling out what the child is expected to do and what you're willing to do to help them to succeed. All right, now let's go to the next section, which are the consequences. Now, I always like to start with the positive consequences because we want them to have start off in a positive attitude about these contracts, and start by listing the positive consequences they can get, then they will do better with that. So I want you to list out, it's basically a statement that says, if you do what I'm asking you to do, then you can get these rewards for your good efforts. Now for young children, the kind of 10 and under crowd, I want you to divide up the rewards into 2 different categories. So one would be daily rewards, and I want you to make a list of about 7 or 8 different rewards that they can pick from. Now they don't get all of these, they get only to pick one of these, and so you're going to create a menu of potential rewards that the child can choose from, and because they have done well on their contract for that day. Now, why daily? Well, because if you don't do it daily, I promise you young children will not get it at first. They need a regular feedback. They need regular reinforcement for their behavior. And if you wait a whole week or longer to reward them for their good behavior, they really won't effectively learn the behaviors that you're trying to teach them. So initially, now eventually we're going to wean all the rewards out and we'll get spread out later, but at the beginning of the contract, you want to set up daily rewards. Now, what are some things I'm talking about? Well, in order to qualify as a reward, it has to be something that normally the child does not have available to them. So if your child regularly has full reign to watch the TV anytime they choose, you can't use watching TV as a reward because they already have that. So it has to be something above and beyond their current level of privileges. So it might be something like, here's some examples of young children rewards. It might be something like, I'll let you ride your bicycle with adult supervision. Or I will let you get a special snack after school. Or I'll let you pick one of the things we're going to eat for supper that night. Or I will let you help me cook supper tonight. I'll play a game with you for 20 or 30 minutes. Or we'll work a puzzle together. Or work on some art or craft project together for, say, 20 or 30 minutes. I'll give you extra TV time if you don't get a lot of TV time. I'll give you extra computer or video game time if that is something that interests the child. I will read an extra bedtime story for you. I will let you stay up a few minutes late, etc. You kind of just think through what is it your child might enjoy, what they might like, and you just kind of list out 7 or 8 different choices that you're willing to do, either because you have the time or the resources to do it, and you're going to offer that to the child. Okay? So that's the daily. Now you also, though, want to give them options for a weekly. Now the weekly would be only about 4 to 5 choices. And of course, the reason for a weekly is to get them to sustain their efforts over time. You don't want to just have a child who occasionally does well so they can get a reward every now and then. You want them to learn that by sustaining their efforts across time, they get big rewards. And so a weekly reward might take a little more time, might cost a little bit more. And so you would have things on that list such as I'll take you to the park, we'll go to a fast food restaurant, I might let you go to the dollar theater, I might take you to the library, I might purchase something not substantial but some small book or a toy or something like that that would be of interest to them. Again, keep trying to be creative and thinking of things your child really enjoys, but something that you would be willing to offer on a weekly basis as a choice for one of the rewards. Okay? So for the young children, you want to have a 7 to 8 daily rewards for the menu and about 4 to 5 weekly rewards. Teenagers, though, and I start with around 11 or 12-year-olds and up, and it depends on the maturity of your child, they do not do very well on this kind of approach. They are less interested in all these little things that you can offer them, and they're more interested in some of the bigger items and some of the more specific interests they have. And teenagers are just different. Some care about some things and they don't care about other things. So you have to do what I think of as the Achilles heel evaluation, the things that matter to a teenager. So let me just kind of go through some of these, and you'll find that for some of you, they're not going to care about money. But some teenagers care a lot about money. And so you might actually offer them an opportunity to earn money for doing well on a contract. Some are really into communication. Telephone, cell phone might be a real interest to them, having opportunities to use a cell phone or having phone access, being able to call someone, a relative friend, or etc. Having the privilege of that communication might be really interesting to them. Some kids like just freedom. They like to be able to go places and do things. They like to hang out with their friends. They're very sociable. So having outings with friends might be something of interest. Some are into clothing, and they care about their shoes and their hats and their dresses and their shirts and all those kind of things, and that's a big deal to them. Some are beginning to drive, so anything having to do with driving, car privilege, being able to get a driver's permit, getting some practice driving, all those potentially can be used as rewards. Loosening of restrictions. So later bedtimes, later curfews, having more freedom to go places might be of interest to some children. Some kids care about trust, where you're allowing them to be a little more independent, staying at home for a short period on their own, being able to go out on their own without adult supervision. Again, your child has to earn this and show they're capable of handling that trust. And some are into their appearance. And by appearance, I don't mean just clothes. I mean the hair and the nails and the looking cool and not having the parents all over you when you're out and about. Now, and then some kids are very into material things. They like their iTunes and their collection of cards or whatever, and they're into having various things, video games, etc. Now, I want to emphasize one more here, and I'll put this over here. And it's special time with parent or mentor. Now, you think, a lot of the kind of myths about teenagers is they don't want to hang out with adults. They don't want to be with parents or mentors. But the research shows that actually sometimes they really cherish those opportunities to spend that extra time. So you might offer them special time with a mentor. I have had some great successes with young teenagers who would be allowed to go fishing with their favorite uncle as a potential benefit or reward for making good efforts in their contracts. So with the older kids, teenagers, you have to kind of find the one or two things on this list that seems to fit your child and theirs interest. Some could care less about being on the cell phone or the phone. And of course that would be a very ineffective reward. But they may care a lot about having material things. They're adding to their card collection or being able to get their CDs or their video games. That might make a big difference to that child or teenager. So for the older kids, you don't have as many rewards options, but you just kind of find that Achilles heel, the thing that really matters to them, and then offer a choice of a couple of things they can choose from. All right, so now we have, and by the way, with the teenagers and older kids, you do not have daily rewards usually, just weekly. Because they're older, they can kind of withstand the stretching out of the reward for their good behavior. So now we've set up the positive consequences for doing well on this contract. Let's turn now to our attention to negative consequences. Because some children are what are called harm avoiders. If you don't have some threat of some negative consequences, you're not going to get their attention. So let's talk about some effective negatives. So starting with the younger children, the first thing I ask parents to think about is privileges. So in our society, children have a lot of privileges. They get to go outside and play, watch TV, play on video games. They have a whole array of toys. There may be all kinds of privileges that a child might have available to them. It's just a normal course of daily living. Now, if the child has not done well on the contract, then you can say, I will take all of your privileges away for that day. Now, I recommend that because in American society, if you take one privilege away, it usually doesn't faze them because they got so many other privileges. They'll just, forget that for now. So you won't let me ride my bicycle. Okay, no big deal. I'll just go inside and play video games. And so I think it's more effective if you're going to use privileges to just hit them with the whole package of privileges for that one day. Now, unfortunately, though, some children are very lazy or very creative. These are the kids who can sit in the corner and play with carpet fuzz. And it doesn't seem to bother them that you've taken all their privileges away. If you have a child like that, then I recommend that you use work as a negative consequence. Now, this would not be their normal chores, but these would be extra duty chores that you would give them for negative consequences of not doing their work. And by the way, you'd back up the work, so I'm going to assign you a job of, say, raking the yard because you've had a bad day today. And by the way, until you've raked the yard, you don't have any privileges. So you kind of have that as the backup consequence. What about the teenager? Well, the teenager, you have to go back to that Achilles heel evaluation. Is it money? Is that what matters to them? If it's money, you know what? It's not illegal. You can take money away from your teenager or not give them money for the normal, let's say, jobs they do, or maybe their allowance, that you can certainly take that away. And I wouldn't spend their money, by the way. That'll infuriate them. I would just tuck it away and say, until you've behaved, you don't get your money back. Or is it phone privilege? You might remove phone privileges. You might take cell phones away. You might restrict them so they can't go out with their friends. You might ground them for the weekend, which is Friday through Sunday. I don't like to use, by the way, weekday grounding because usually they're out and about in school. You really can't control grounding in that way. But for some very sociable children, taking away their opportunities to be with friends can be a big deal. So you get the idea. You kind of go through that Achilles heel. You find the thing that matters to them the most. Take that away for 1 week for the teenager. Now you're saying, well, that sounds kind of weak. Well, the reason I say 1 week is because it is the coming and the going of these privileges. The coming and the go of money and time with friends or having their special things. It's taking those things away on a week-to-week basis teaches them that when you're behaving badly, you lose these things. On the other hand, when you behave well, you get them right back. And that's the most effective way to teach children how to behave. Oh, let me just say, on the kids who love their possessions, I like to use the pawn ticket approach. And so if the child has misbehaved, and let's say they had a school contract where they were supposed to behave in school, and they haven't done very well this week, then while they're at school, you go into their room, you find that favorite thing they cherish the most, you take it, you leave a little ticket, says, pawn ticket, you've lost this until you've had a good week in school. And that way you don't have to take it away from them, you don't have to confront them, you don't have to create a battle. Just kind of quietly go about your business. Now, you told them in advance you're going to do this, but when they show up from school on Friday afternoon, lo and behold, their iPod is gone or their video game system is gone. And there it is, the ticket that is the evidence that you did exactly what you said you were going to do. So, last thing I'll say about the negative consequences is do not use taking time away from a parent or mentor. Now, you can add extra time as a reward, but don't take away that special time with parent or mentor because it has such emotional baggage connected with it. It might actually cause more problems than the good it might achieve. All right, so now we have positive consequences and now we have negative consequences. What's next on the contract? Well, it's very simple. Signatures. Signatures. I want a contract to be in writing. I've heard a lot of times parents say to me, oh, we've tried something like that, and I go, great, could you bring me in the contract? I'd like to take a look at it. And they say, well, we didn't really write it down. The research shows that if you write it down in very clear language for the child or teenager, that you will have a much greater rate of success simply by writing it down. Why would that be? Well, one, it makes you as the parent be very, very clear what you're asking them to do. And quite frankly, when we have to sign our names to something, we tend to take it more seriously. And the child will do that as well. So write this out. Don't just talk about it. Write it out. Put it in a way that it's clear to the child and have each partner, parents and child, to sign this contract. And the last piece is a begin date and a renegotiation date. Now, so you're being just really clear when this contract is going to start, and you want to kind of have a renegotiation date. And I would suggest you make that about a 2-week period. And the reason for that is that you may need to change the contract. There may be a particular problem with the contract, and I don't want you to just change it on a daily basis, but in about 2 weeks you'll know whether or not you're going in the right direction if you need to make some adjustments. All right, now, the first thing then is to for the parents to write out this contract as carefully as you possibly can. And then you present it to the child. Now, there are 2 parts of the contract that you can get input from the child on the contract. So one is the parents expected to. Remember, this section is supposed to be encouraging to the child to get across the message that you really are trying to be helpful. So you would ask the child, after you've reviewed this written contract that you're presenting to the child, is there anything else that I, as a parent, can do to help you to be successful? If they come up with a good idea, make sure you put that in the contract. If they come up with a bad idea, say, no, I'm not willing to do that. So in other words, you have veto power. You don't have to do what they say, but it often can be useful to get their input on this. All right, the second part of the contract is the positives, the positive consequences. All right, so you can ask the child, here are some things that I'm willing to offer you as rewards. Is there anything else that I might offer you to encourage you to try harder? Once again, if the child has a good idea, you want to include that in the contract. If it's a bad idea, then don't include that in the contract. I will say, though, that I've had children who gave what seemed to be bad ideas that turned out to be a pathway to a very good idea. Let me tell you about a young 16, 17-year-old teenager I was working with who was having a terrible time in school, was not really cooperating, was getting in fights and being belligerent with teachers, just really having a hard time of it. And so we worked up a contract for this teenager to improve his behavior in class. And so we got through the contract, presented it, and said, is there anything else we can offer you as a reward? And here's what he said. Well, I will do better in school if you will give me a sports car. Now, of course, Dad looked at him with this kind of incredulous look on his face and said, that's ridiculous. You know, I can't afford a sports car, and if I could afford a sports car, I'd be driving the sports car, not you. But it gave the dad a good idea, because his son did in fact have his own car. It was kind of a junk, used car. His dad had a much cooler car than he did. And so the dad said, no, I'm not willing to buy you a sports car. That's ridiculous. But here's what I will do. If you have a good week in school, I'll let you borrow my car from 7 o'clock on Friday nights to 10 o'clock. I'll let you borrow my car. The kid's eyes lit up. He went, really? Are you serious? His dad had a much cooler car than he did. He says, yes, I am serious. And it turned out that was a very successful reward that really worked for the child in improving his behavior in school. And so sometimes you can listen to them and get good ideas about rewards. Two things not to get input from them. One is what you expect of them. This is your desire. This is what you want them to work on. Now you can make points of clarification, of course, but ultimately it is up to you to decide what is expected of the child. And then secondly are the negative consequences. Now I know some psychologists actually would encourage you to get input on negative consequences. I prefer not to, because I want to create an understanding to the child that you are the parent and you do have some executive power, and so we're not going to negotiate or discuss the negative consequences. That's what I've decided to do. All right, a couple of kind of finishing up points here. What can we expect from this contract? What are we likely to get? Let's go back to the learning curve on positive consequence as a way of kind of estimating what's likely to happen with contracts. If you recall on these positive consequence learning curves, we know that it goes pretty slow at first and then gradually starts getting better. From here to here, when you're beginning to see some small, tiny improvement, is about 3 weeks. Okay? So I'll just remind you of that so that you will be patient. Don't expect big changes in the first few days or even first week or two. It's going to take a while. If it's really a hard problem for the child, it's going to take a little while for them to really start having some success. Now, sometimes with young children, we get this phenomenon. They get super excited about these contracts. They do really well for a couple of days, and then they're back to square one. You get all excited. You go, oh, that Dr. Mabe is a genius. This is great. And then, 3 days later, going, gee, this isn't working, and then we're right back to square one. Dr. Mabe doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, just be aware that having a quick burst of positive energy at the beginning is not unusual for young kids, but don't get too enthusiastic about that. Teenagers will do this. They actually get worse at first. Kind of gripes them off that you are forcing them into this contract and you're making them do these things that you expect of them. And sometimes they kind of will be rebellious. My experience, however, is if you hang in there and go through that first week and you go ahead and implement those negative consequences, that they'll start realizing that you really mean business and you're going to make things really different around here. So be patient with that. Well, what if the teenager says, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to sign that contract. Well, here's what I want you to tell them. Present the contract to them, explain it to them. They say, well, this is stupid. I'm not going to sign it. Here's what you say. Well, let me just explain that if you don't sign this contract, we're still going to expect you to do these things. And we're still going to implement the negative consequences. It doesn't really matter if you sign this contract or not. We're still going to do that. And if you don't sign this contract, you will have no opportunity for the positive consequences we're willing to offer you. If you want positives, you're going to have to sign this contract. Now, after a while, I promise you, teenagers are going to figure this out and they go, okay, I'll sign it. It may take 2 or 3 days before they figure that out, but just be patient. Don't force it down their throats. Just keep implementing the negative consequences until they figure this thing out. All right, now what about on the other end? How long does it take to get here? This is where we want to be, right? And I would say on average it's around 6 to 12 weeks. where it takes to get to this kind of positive point. Once you reach success, they're consistently doing well. For the young children, I want you to drop out the daily rewards and only use weekly rewards. What are we doing? We're preparing them for the reality the contract is going to end. All good contracts should end. They should not go on forever and ever. And so once they start having success, we're going to start preparing them for the end of the contract. After all, we're teaching them behaviors that hopefully have their own natural, logical reward. And so we shouldn't have to have these artificial rewards forever. All right, so once they get up here, then we go to weekly. After they do a couple of good weeks doing really well on just weekly, then we have the graduation party. We go take them out to dinner. We tell them how proud we are of them, and we basically say the contract is over. So you kind of wean them out of the reward is a basic approach with contracts. Now, one final warning, and we'll finish for today. The research shows that after you've had success with a contract and you take them off all of the rewards and all of the spelling out all the expectations, that about 40% of them or so will relapse sometime in the next year or so. In other words, they will continue to have some problems. So don't be discouraged by that, however, because all you have to do is whip out that contract number 2, redo it, go through the same sequence I've described for you. After they've gone through the contract twice, the relapse rate, the returning to the same old problems issue, is only about 20%. So the success rate, if you do it right, can be very successful. I hope these comments have been helpful to you. I encourage you, if you have significant problems, to use contracts, because then they can be a very effective tool in your tool bag. Thank you for your attention.